Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of A Word to the Broken with Victor Jackson. And we have some exciting things that are coming in this podcast that we're going to be releasing every week. So be in expectancy for that, be anticipating that. I want to thank you for the feedback that you guys gave me in regard to um, what a blessing our last episode was and all the kind messages and comments and reviews. Thank you for leaving those 5-star reviews and those comments and the feedback. Uh, it helps us to make sure that we're getting the word out there. Share this episode with someone. Today, I want to speak on something very important. I want to talk about the resilience of a wounded child. And I take my thought from the story of Mephibosheth in 2 Samuel chapter 4 and verse 4. It says, And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame of his feet. He was 5 years old when the tidings came of Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel. And his nurse took him up and fled. And it came to pass, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. I want to talk about the resilience of a wounded child. Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son. Jonathan was next in line to the throne of Saul. Mephibosheth had a purpose. His name means the dispeller of shame, it means the destroyer of shame. With all the shame that Saul had caused on the lineage of the Benjamites and on his legacy, Mephibosheth was born with the intention and the destiny to dispel that shame. There were some atrocious things that Saul did, especially with how he killed many of the Gibeonites. There was a lot of shame that came with his disobedience and how he manipulated and coerced. He really had a narcissistic character leadership trait. And and Mephibosheth came from that line. But Jonathan had enough prophetic insight to believe that Mephibosheth would reverse everything. But a traumatic moment happened in the life of Mephibosheth when his grandfather and his father, Saul and Jonathan, they both were killed in the same battle. And whenever something like that happens, it was very customary in that time to make sure you protected who's in line to the throne, the one with that purpose, that destiny, that assignment. And so a nurse takes the responsibility and picks up Mephibosheth and begins to run with him because of the fear of possible danger. After trauma, there's that flight that kicks in. She picks him up, and as she's running with him, she drops him, and he becomes lame in both of his feet. What once worked well, now after a traumatic moment, trauma on top of trauma, now this child is wounded. Much of our lives are spent trying to recover from the wounds that happened to us as children. Um, and literally, the United States economists, when they wanted to see where our country is going to be in 20 years economically, what these economists do is they send researchers into Head Start classrooms, children from 3 to 5 years old, and study their behaviors and how they interact with one another. Because they see how what happens in childhood can affect nations. And this is one of the things that the enemy does to the people of God is he tries to get you early in infant stage so you spend the rest of your life in recovery. Mephibosheth has a wound, and because of this wound, now there seems to not be a safe place. He has to live in Lodabar. Lodabar means no communication. It's pastureless. Nothing happens in Lodabar. He is royalty, but what happens in trauma is your posterior cingulate cortex, which is the thing that determines your sense of self, your internal reflection, and your spatial reflection, meaning your sense to the world. When trauma happens, that is disrupted, where you have no sense of your identity and who you are, and you have no sense in where you fit in the world because of a traumatic moment. When that traumatic moment comes, there is also the loss of the future dimension, the area in your brain that is designed to plan and have forethought. Now it is disrupted because you're literally just trying to survive. You're literally just trying to make it. You cannot plan for tomorrow or what you want to be in the future because all of your energy and effort and mental capacity is spent on how do I survive the danger of right now. In my studies with Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, um, he showed us these brain scans, and he showed us how a normal brain scan looks, where someone is rested. And in their brain, when the brain is rested, there's a lot of activity going on, signs of life and vibrancy. And then he showed what happens to the brain when there is a viable threat and danger. And what happens is that brain loses its activity, and it just focuses in on survival, uh, fight, flight threats, fight, flight things in their mind, where there's no activity other than that survival activity in the fight or flight. That's a normal brain. Lots of activity during rested states, little activity during high threat states. But then he showed us the brain scan of a traumatized individual. And when he showed us that brain scan of that traumatized individual, during the rested state of a traumatized individual, their brain is not on. It's not vibrant. It is literally in that threatened state where it's just fight or flight during rest, hypervigilance. Nothing significant happened. It's just rest. They're in the rested state. The brain doesn't have a lot of activity. But then it showed the image of the brain of a traumatized individual when there is a threat. And all of a sudden, the brain turns on and it's moving at a high capacity when there is a viable threat nearby. And that is what trauma does. When nothing is going wrong in our lives, then it's like we're not alive. We don't feel alive. But when there is danger, confusion, chaos, suffering, that is when we're at our best because of the trauma that we have endured in our childhood. Mephibosheth loses his sense of self and his context of the world because he lost his father and his grandfather in a day. And at the same time, he has a traumatic injury where he cannot use his feet any longer. And his sense of being is disrupted. And he has to survive in Lodabar. Loses his sense of self, just eating and living, but well below what he was designed to operate in because of the pain that entered into his life. Um, we have to commend Mephibosheth here, because when a traumatic event comes upon you, we find our own coping mechanisms. We have to have some self compassion on ourselves to do what is necessary to survive, even though it's not ideal. It wasn't ideal for Mephibosheth to be living in Lodabar, but he did what he had to do just to survive. And you need to learn to have compassion on yourself whenever you are doing what it takes to cope with a traumatic event that did not belong to you and that caught you off guard. Then there comes a moment years later when David's, on the throne, and David says in 2 Samuel chapter 9 verse 1, he says, "And David said, is there yet any that is left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" And this servant named Ziba says, "Yes, Jonathan has a son, and he is lame on both of his feet." And David said, the king said, "Go get him." Now, this is interesting because Mephibosheth is doing what it takes to survive, off the map, unknown. I mean, pretty much his life is buried. But David said, "I want to show kindness to the house of Saul. Is there anyone left? Is there a son left? Is there anyone that has survived?" And the servant says, "Yeah, there's someone that's left, but he is severely traumatized. He is lame on both of his feet." And the king said, "Where is he?" David said, "I'm looking for someone to partake of this blessing. And the qualification that I'm looking for someone that will partake of this blessing of the future is there anyone left? Is there anyone left?" After all the trauma, after all the heartache, one of the greatest acts of resilience that you can have is the declaration that I'm still here. I have a lot of weaknesses, but I'm still here. Been through a lot of trauma, but I'm still here. Failed a few times, but I'm still here. Almost gave up, almost quit, but I am still here. I have a resilience because what came against me did not take me out. And I want to commend all of our listeners right now and let you know, praise God that you are still here. Not perfect. You may be lame in some areas. You may be wounded in some areas, but you are still here, and that qualifies you for a seat at the table. You can occupy your space with boldness and with the divine fortitude, because guess what? You are still here. That's all David was looking for. Is there anyone resilient enough that survived the impossible? I'm speaking to listeners right now that have survived the impossible. You went through one of the most traumatic moments in your childhood. It's a miracle that you even believe in God. It's a miracle that you're able to even have a relationship with your family. It's a miracle that you're even going to church right now with all that you have suffered. And you have a testimony that through it all, I have a resilience. I am still here. It didn't defeat me. It didn't bury me. I did what I had to do to cope. But God said, I'm looking for somebody that is resilient enough to survive the impossible. God didn't cause your pain, but can I tell you, God can use it and make you come out of it better with a post-traumatic growth. I am still here. And Ziba tried to disqualify him. He says, listen, Jonathan has a son, but he's lame on both his feet. But David said, where is he? You see, because after all that he went through, he's still a son. After all that he has survived, he's still a child and in the lineage of kings. He's still royalty, although he's wounded. Can I speak to somebody listening right now? You are still royalty, although you have been wounded. Yeah. Do not disqualify yourself. Do not feel like you are less than, or that God is going to overlook you and pass you by. I've come to tell you that you have a resilience, because after all you've been through, here you are listening to try to become what God wants you to become. Here you are still pushing forward. You're in school, you're in work, you're doing what it takes, even while you're living in Lodabar. There is a seat at the table of royalty that only you can occupy. That seat doesn't belong to anyone else but somebody that has survived the impossible. Mephibosheth had a resilience that came out of his trauma. In the aftermath of trauma, I am so impressed with you and your resiliency. This never quit in you. No matter what happens, somehow you keep getting back up and keep believing. That is not something to just walk by and not notice. I want to honor you for holding on to God, holding on to your faith, and standing in the midst of all of this when you could have threw in the towel a long time ago. Never underestimate the power of being there, of still being here. That is resilience. Mephibosheth had a resilience. You know, in the Old Testament, there was a time when God was looking to make a mighty army. He wanted to make a mighty army. The Spirit of God paces to and fro looking for the potential to make a mighty army. Looks to the left, sees a young man doing push-ups, and on the outside, it looks like that's all that it takes to make a mighty army. But God passes him up and says, I'm not going to use you to make a mighty army. He looks to the right and sees a young intellectual that has all the battle skills and strategies in his mind. And God looks at him and says, no, I'm not going to use you to make a mighty army. When God was looking for the raw material to make a mighty army, he stumbled upon the valley of dry bones. And God could not make an army out of a valley. The bones still had to be there. And because the bones were still there, even though they were dry, even though they've been there a long time, even though they're in the aftermath of a defeat, oh my. Oh, are you hearing what I'm saying? Because the bones were still there, the prophet Ezekiel began to prophesy to these bones, and those bones began to come together, and those bones stood up, and Ezekiel prophesied to the wind and for breath to come into these bones, and the bones stood up as an exceeding great and mighty army, but it never couldn't have happened if the bones weren't still there. The animals didn't come and take them away. The dust didn't bury them. Come on now. They were in the aftermath of a traumatic event, but because they were there, that was the raw material for post-traumatic growth and greatness to come out of it. You may feel dry, but you're here. And because you're here, God's going to use you to do something amazing in his kingdom. You may feel like you have just been cast aside, left for dead. But can I tell you, even in that Lodabar, I'm talking to somebody right now, you're still here. And breath is coming into you. Life is coming into you. I am speaking life and breath into these bones and commanding these bones. Stand up. There's still a future for you, and there's still a seat at the table for you. When I'm speaking like this, sometimes it is tough for people to believe what I'm saying because that trauma has destroyed that sense of self. And here I am under the unction of God's Spirit, rewiring your brain to believe that you are made for more than just surviving in Lodabar. And it doesn't matter how lame you are or how wounded you are. I've come to commend you and honor you for your resilience. And it is in that resilience that growth and post-traumatic growth is being born. And you're going to come out of this better than you went in. You're going to come out of this with more fortitude. You're going to come out of this. We're not minimizing the trauma. We're not romanticizing the trauma. But what we are saying is, I am not defined by what happened to me. God's hand is on my life. And somehow, if I can give this pain and this lameness to God, He's going to bring me into a new dimension and a new table. And so he's supposed to be the dispeller of shame, but he's living with the shame of lame feet. And one of the ways to overcome that shame is to have somebody like a David to honor you even in the condition that you're in, to see value in you even in the condition that you're in. David saw value in him, even in his condition. Now, when Mephibosheth comes to David, Mephibosheth still is disoriented, doesn't realize who he is and what he has. When Mephibosheth comes to David, he says, "Behold thy servant." And David says, "Listen, I'm going to show kindness." And Mephibosheth says, "Who am I? I'm just a dead dog." Wow. Mephibosheth is qualified for the blessing because he's a son. But he has lost his sense of self, his sense of importance, his sense of who he is in relation to the world, because of that posterior cingulate cortex being damaged. He has no spatial recognition of who he is. He says, "I'm just a servant and I'm just a dead dog. I'm the lowest of the lowest. Look at me. Look at my trauma. Look at what I've come out of." He doesn't even feel like he's qualified for blessing because of the trauma that had come into his life. But David said, "You're a son. You are a son. You're not defined by what happened to you. You're a son." He said, David says, "I'm going to show you kindness for Jonathan, thy father's sake." That's in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 7. "And I will restore unto you all the land of Saul, thy father, and thou shalt eat bread at my table continually." He says, I am blessing you because of your identity. And just because you went through a rough season, that doesn't change your identity. Just because you went through a tough difficulty, it doesn't change your identity. In my Facebook and Instagram, I posted that an elevator is still called an elevator when it goes down. Even when an elevator is on the lowest part of the floor, even if it sits there for a while, it is still called an elevator. Even when it's not elevating, you're still going to call it an elevator. You see, where its location is does not dictate its value, and it does not dictate its identity. Oh, I'm talking right now. It's like the man that was playing $1 million violin, And he has sold out shows all around the world. But he was playing it out on a subway. And how everyone ignored him and walked past him, and everybody ignored him. And he was a nuisance because of his location. But his location wasn't his identity. So you see, you have to learn how to navigate being in locations at the bottom without internalizing the bottom as if that's you in your state. Can I tell you, you are still a son of God. You are still a daughter of the King. You still have value no matter how low you may be. And you're going to be blessed because of your identity, not because of your past frailties and faults and trauma that you have been through. And the Bible says that Mephibosheth came, and verse 13 says, so Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, for he did eat continually at the king's table and was lame on both of his feet. This is resilience and post-traumatic growth, because this was his qualification. Even though he was wounded, he kept showing up to the king's table. Even though he was traumatized and felt unworthy, he kept showing up to the king's table. You just got to keep showing up. Even when you feel half backslid, just keep showing up. Even when you feel like a failure, just keep showing up. Even when you feel like you can't make it another day, you just got to keep showing up. Because as you keep showing up, you're going to start getting adjusted to your identity. As Mephibosheth showed up to the king's table, his thought process of himself began to change, and it began to shift. He began to realize who he was. I wasn't made for Lodabar. I wasn't made for barely surviving. I wasn't made to live my life in fight or flight and hiding. I was made to sit down in peace. Oh, I'm talking to somebody right now. To be seated in heavenly places. I was made for more. And as he kept showing up with his wound, he began to be convinced, and healing began to come into his mind as he recognized, I am a son and I deserve a seat at the table. Let me tell you, God put you in this world for a reason. Have the courage to occupy your space. Stop apologizing for being in the room. Stop apologizing for being at the table. Take your seat of authority. It belongs to you. Stop apologizing, feeling like you're intruding upon your family, intruding in your workspace, intruding in your company, intruding in your church or in your ministry. Occupy your space. You belong here. And it's a privilege that you are here. I feel healing and transformation taking place. You just got to keep showing up. That's half the battle. Just keep showing up. You just got to keep showing up. No matter how you feel, it doesn't change who you are. And I see greatness on the inside of you. It's amazing because in the New Testament, there was a man, after Judas failed God, Peter said, listen, we only got 11 apostles. We're just looking for one person to become an apostle. Here's the qualifications. We need someone that has been here since the time of John the Baptist until now. This is in Acts 1. And the Bible says that the lot fell on Matthias, and Matthias became the 12th apostle, and his only qualification was that I'm still here. And I just kept showing up. Even when John the Baptist was beheaded, even whenever the crowds left Jesus, even when they didn't understand his teachings and were offended at him, even when he was crucified and buried, I just kept showing up. And God said, you are qualified for the next level because you had a resilience of being here and continuing to show up. Welcome to the next level. Share this podcast with someone. I pray it's a blessing. Thank you for allowing me to serve you. Leave a 5-star rating and a comment if this has been a blessing to you. Look forward for more on my social media pages. I have more great updates coming for you. Thank you for joining. I believe in you, and the shame is falling off of you. I feel God's Spirit talking. The shame is falling off of you. You're discovering who you are. Occupy your space. I believe in you.